My fiancée vanished during a break and came back acting like we were still planning a wedding, but I had a surprise of my own. I still remember the sound of her suitcase wheels against the hallway floor. Emma turned, kissed my cheek, and said, "Just a couple weeks with my grandmother. Don't stress, okay?" I smiled, waved her off, and went back to sorting wedding RSVPs. That was the last normal moment I had for a long time. The next day, she called like usual, asked about my lunch, and told me the weather up north was cold. But on day two, her tone changed. Her voice was flat, almost mechanical. "Lucas, I think I need some time to think, just about things." That phrase hit like a punch I didn't see coming. And then came silence. Texts? No reply. Calls? Straight to voicemail. No Instagram stories. No Facebook activity. Nothing. It was like she evaporated. Even her sister dodged my messages. Weeks passed, and so did the fear. It morphed into rage. Something in me snapped. I packed my bag, drove hours upstate, and showed up at her grandmother's house unannounced. She opened the door in sweatpants I didn't recognize, and behind her on the couch sat her ex, holding a cup of tea as if he belonged there. And that's when I knew this wedding wasn't happening. Emma and I met at a community cleanup event. She was wearing this oversized Save the Bees t-shirt, her hair in a messy ponytail, and she was arguing loudly with a guy about plastic waste in rivers. I was the guy. It started with irritation, turned into laughter, and by the end of the afternoon, we were eating tacos on the curb, our gloves still on, our hands filthy. It was the most unexpected start to anything I'd ever experienced, and it felt right. Emma was bright in every sense. Her laugh lit up a room, and when she talked, people leaned in. I was drawn to her energy. Bold, a little chaotic, but always real. We started dating just a week after that cleanup. It escalated quickly: hikes, road trips, midnight pancakes, long talks about books, music, politics, and childhood regrets. By the third month, she'd met my mom. By the fifth, I knew I was all in. She had dreams, big ones: a master's in environmental policy, then hopefully a job with the EPA. I believed in her, so when she got into her top choice grad school 3 states away, I didn't even blink. I moved with her. Took a demotion at work, shifted schedules, and made it work. I wanted to be where she was, no question. We built a life from scratch in that new city. Our apartment was tiny, with plumbing that groaned like a ghost at night. But we made it ours, painted the walls together, argued over curtain colors, and cooked elaborate meals we couldn't afford. It felt like something sacred. I supported her through the stress of her program: late nights, research deadlines, and meltdowns over policy analysis. She'd bury her face in my hoodie and mumble, "I'm so tired, but I'm glad you're here." I always was. Every birthday, I planned something thoughtful: sunrise hikes, old school scavenger hunts, that trip to Asheville she never saw coming. I memorized her coffee order and learned her tells when she was lying about being fine. I held her when she cried over family drama. I sent flowers on her exam days. The night I proposed was simple. No flash mobs or drones, just us on the balcony after dinner, fairy lights strung around, our dog curled at our feet. She cried before I even finished asking, said yes through tears. It felt like a forever moment. We started planning the wedding. Summer date, outdoor venue, lavender theme. Emma was particular but not overbearing. We spent weekends sampling cakes, debating table setups, and browsing DJ playlists while dancing barefoot in the living room. We laughed a lot. At night, we'd lie in bed and talk about the future: a fixer-upper house in the suburbs, a rescue dog, maybe 2 kids if we could handle the chaos. She wanted to name the girl River. I joked that our son would end up named after a Marvel character. There was trust. At least, I thought there was. I would have bet my life on her. I had, in a way. If someone had asked me 6 months ago who Emma was, to me, I would have said, my anchor, my home. But anchors can drag you down too, can't they? I still remember one quiet evening after a long day. We sat on the kitchen floor, eating cereal out of the box and listening to some obscure indie album she loved. She looked at me and said, I'm so lucky to have you. Sometimes I don't know how I got this lucky. I believed her, I believed in us. And that's what makes everything that followed hurt so much, because I wasn't just mourning a breakup, I was grieving a version of the past that now felt like a lie. The first signs were almost invisible, so small I could convince myself they weren't there. It started with her phone. Emma had always been a sharer, memes, photos, random voice notes of songs she was obsessed with, but suddenly her phone was face down, notifications silenced. She claimed she was just trying to be present, which sounded noble, so I let it slide. Then came the canceled plans. Dinners we'd scheduled weeks in advance were scrapped with vague excuses. Sorry, I promised to help Kayla with her thesis, or there's a study group that turned into a late-night thing. Logical, reasonable, except they stacked up, and when I offered to tag along, she'd flinch. It's not really your scene. There was one evening I'll never forget. We'd planned a simple dinner, just burgers and a movie at home. I cleaned up early, lit candles, and even made her favorite sweet potato fries from scratch. She came home nearly 2 hours late, smelling like some cologne I didn't recognize, and waved it off with, I lost track of time. Sorry, babe. No explanation, no apology. Her hugs became half-hearted, her laughter didn't reach her eyes anymore. She used to run to the door when I got home. Now she barely looked up. I noticed the way she started dressing differently, more carefully, like she was heading somewhere special, even on supposed library nights. I once jokingly asked, who's the lucky study partner? She laughed too loudly and didn't answer. The emotional distance was worse than any fight we'd ever had. We weren't even arguing. We were just coexisting, strangers in shared space. One Saturday morning, I offered to drive her to class. She hesitated before saying, no, I'll take the bus. I like the time to think. She used to love those rides. We'd listen to podcasts and hold hands at red lights. Now she preferred silence. Conversations turned surface level. She'd talk about politics, classes, and people from her internship, but not us. When I asked how she was feeling lately, she smiled too quickly and said, fine, just tired. That word again. One weekend, I surprised her with a spontaneous day trip to a winery we'd talked about. She looked annoyed instead of excited. I wish you'd told me. I already had plans with the girls. I offered to reschedule. She said, no, let's go. But her smile was hollow, and she checked her phone constantly. The entire ride there, she stared out the window like I wasn't even there. She stopped calling me during the day. Texts became emojis and one-word replies. I thought maybe she was just overwhelmed, so I stepped back and gave her space. But space turned into silence. One night, she came home after midnight and said she'd been with a classmate working on a policy presentation. I asked if she wanted to talk about it. She looked annoyed. Can we not do this right now? I'm exhausted. And then she just walked past me. Even our wedding planning changed. What used to be exciting turned mechanical. She barely looked at invitations. When I asked her opinion on the menu, she shrugged, whatever you like. She used to cry watching wedding videos on YouTube with me. Now she barely glanced at the sample playlist I made. There was a particular moment, quiet, mundane, that broke something in me. We were walking in the park. A dog barked loudly nearby, and instinctively I reached for her hand. She pulled away like she didn't even notice. I pretended I hadn't noticed either, but I did. I started questioning everything. Was I boring her? Was I not enough? Was she regretting our engagement? One night I asked Emma, are you still happy with me? She didn't answer right away, just stared at her tea, then said, You're good to me, Lucas. That's all. Not yet. Not, of course I am. Just that. And that's when the doubt really started. Because sometimes kindness sounds like distance when it's all you're given. But she said she needed a break. It was a Tuesday morning. Over toast and coffee, Emma looked up from her phone and said casually, too casually, I'm thinking of visiting my grandmother next week. Just a short break. She's been asking about me. Okay, I said, caught off guard. You want me to come? She hesitated. Actually, I think I need to go alone. I just need some space to think. That word again. I stared at her, trying to read her face. Think about what? She didn't look at me. Just everything. Work, school, us. It's been a lot lately. I wanted to ask if she was still in this and if we were still okay. But I didn't. I nodded as I understood. I kissed her goodbye that Friday morning and watched her load her suitcase into the back of her car. I'll call tonight, she promised. I didn't. That first night, I told myself maybe she was tired. The next day, I sent her a good morning text. No reply. Then a miss you. Silence. By the third day, I called. Straight to voicemail. By the fifth, I called again. Then again. I messaged her sister, who responded with, she's probably just decompressing. Give her time. Time stretched like a rubber band about to snap. She stopped posting on social media. Emma, who used to share everything from coffee art to bad traffic, went completely dark. It was like she'd ghosted the world. But really, she just ghosted me. First, I defended her. To friends, to myself. She's probably overwhelmed, I'd say. She just needs a reset. But how long does a reset take before it turns into running? 2 weeks in, I cracked. I told myself I just wanted closure. Just wanted to see her face, make sure she was okay. But the truth is, I wanted answers, needed them. I packed a bag, fueled the car, and drove 4 hours north. Rehearsed a dozen scenarios. Maybe she was sick, maybe her grandma had an emergency, maybe she'd just lost her phone and didn't know how to reach me. But as soon as I pulled up to her grandmother's porch, none of those options felt real anymore. It was dusk, the sky bruised with shades of purple and gray. I knocked once. The door creaked open before I could knock again. And there she was. Emma, in sweatpants that weren't hers, hair tied in a low bun, no makeup. She looked startled, like I was a problem she hadn't expected to deal with. Lucas, she said, her voice cracked. I stepped inside. The living room smelled like cinnamon and something burnt, and then I saw him, a man sitting on the couch. Tall, lean, sharp jawline. He was holding a chipped mug with both hands like he belonged there. His posture said this wasn't his first visit. Emma followed my gaze and stepped between us. This is, let me guess, I cut her off, your ex. She winced. Silence swelled between us. I turned to her, keeping my voice steady. Is this why you left? Why you vanished? To reconnect with him? It wasn't like that, she said quickly, eyes darting everywhere but at me. I didn't plan it. We just ran into each other at the co-op. We talked, that's all, at first. And then? She bit her lip. Then, we kept talking. I needed clarity. You needed clarity, I repeated, the words burning my throat. So you disappeared on me and found it in his arms. It wasn't physical, she whispered. That somehow made it worse. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. She had chosen not to call, not to reply, not to tell me the truth. You ghosted your fiancé, I said slowly, for 2 weeks while you played memory lane with your ex. Her eyes filled, but I didn't care. You could have just said something. You owed me that much. Hell, we were planning our wedding. You were picking flower colors, and all the while you were wondering if you still wanted me? I didn't know what I was feeling, she said. I was confused. I shook my head, trying to stay upright. The room tilted slightly. She stood finally. Maybe I should go. Don't bother, I snapped. I'm leaving. I turned to Emma. You said you needed time. Well, now I do. She stepped forward, reaching out like she could stop what was happening. Luke, no, my voice cracked. You don't get to hurt me and then hold me in place. I left. The drive back was the longest 4 hours of my life. I didn't cry, not then. I just sat with the truth, let it sink in. Her absence had been a wound. Now I saw the knife too. She hadn't just betrayed me, she abandoned us. That night, I sat in the kitchen, in the dark, phone in my hand, rereading old messages. Can't wait to marry you. You're my safe place. Forever isn't long enough with you. Lies, all of them. Or maybe they used to be true. Either way, they weren't anymore. Wish I could say I got angry, that I punched a wall, screamed into the night, or broke something valuable just to hear it shatter. But I didn't. I just sat there, on our couch, alone. The TV played a cooking show I wasn't watching. The lights were off. My phone buzzed once, probably Mark checking in. I didn't look. For the first few days, I functioned on autopilot. Wake up, shower, stare at my toothbrush like it holds answers, go to work, say the right words, nod, pretend. My coworkers noticed. You okay, man? They asked. I smiled, said the line we all say when we're anything but just tired. Even my boss pulled me aside. You seem off. I nodded again. Long week? I muttered. But it wasn't a week, it was a collapse. I stopped cooking, just takeout boxes and empty soda cans piling up on the counter. I didn't fold laundry, just pulled shirts from the hamper and sprayed them with cologne. At night, the silence in our apartment was suffocating. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every scene of our relationship like a director trying to edit a movie that had already flopped. I questioned everything. Was there a moment I missed, a signal I didn't read? Should I have fought harder, asked more questions, and demanded honesty when I first felt her pulling away? Or maybe I was just easy to leave. I remember one night I found myself scrolling through old photos, us at the Grand Canyon grinning like idiots, her asleep on my shoulder during a bus ride in Spain, her wearing my hoodie 3 sizes too big, flipping pancakes. I stared at those images like they were of strangers, people I used to know. I started writing letters I never sent, to her, to myself. Some of them were angry, raw, with betrayal. Others were desperate, begging for clarity, for answers, for a different ending. Most ended with me typing, I don't know, over and over again. I avoided our bedroom for days, slept on the couch, until one night, out of pure exhaustion, I wandered back in. Her scent still lingered faintly on the pillows. I hated how much I missed her, even knowing what she did. That was the worst part, missing someone who broke you. Friends kept reaching out, Mark, Jenna, and even Rachel from work. I ignored their calls at first. Then Mark showed up at my door with beer and a pizza and said, I'm not leaving until you talk. I didn't, not really. But we sat in silence, and that helped more than I expected. Jenna was more direct. You don't deserve that, Lucas, she said bluntly when I finally told her. She was selfish. You were steady. That imbalance catches up. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Because in my head, I still kept thinking, if I'd been more exciting, more adventurous, less predictable, maybe she wouldn't have gone looking elsewhere. The lies we tell ourselves are brutal. There was a moment, one low, hollow night, when I considered calling her, just to hear her voice, just to ask why. But I didn't. Because I already knew the answer. She wanted something I wasn't. And maybe that was okay. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be her forever. But damn, I thought I was. I started running, not metaphorically, literally. At 6 a.m., when the world was still quiet, I'd throw on sneakers and just go. Down the street, through the park, past houses still sleeping. It didn't fix anything, but the rhythm of my footsteps gave my brain something else to do besides spiral. One morning, I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed on a bench, sweat pouring, heart racing. And for the first time in weeks, I cried. Not quiet tears, ugly, chest heaving sobs. It wasn't just about her, it was about all the versions of the future I had to let go of. The house, the wedding, the kids with names we joked about, the we that would never be again. And somewhere between those sobs and the rising sun, I felt something shift. I'm not healing, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Healing didn't look like a montage. It didn't come with upbeat music or sunshine mornings where I suddenly loved myself again. It wasn't linear, it wasn't Instagram worthy, and it didn't feel like strength. It felt like forcing myself to eat toast at 2 p.m. because I hadn't eaten all day. It felt like deleting her number and retyping it minutes later. It felt like getting out of bed, brushing my teeth, and calling that a victory. But I started. It began with small wins, tidying the kitchen, donating the dress shirts she bought me, and moving her favorite mug to the back of the cabinet. I didn't throw it out, not yet. I just relocated it. Distance, even in inches, helped. The first Friday night alone, I watched the sunset from my balcony. No music, no phone, just sat there, letting silence settle over me. The air was still. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. That was something. Mark came by more often. He brought takeout and dumb movies. We didn't talk about her unless I brought it up. Sometimes I did. Most times we just watched stuff explode on screen and laughed at our own bad jokes. He gave me space to be okay or not okay, whatever I needed. Then Rachel invited me to a writing workshop. You need something for yourself, she said. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to share or hear strangers talk about feelings, but she was relentless and I was tired of being alone with my thoughts, so I went. There were 12 of us in a cramped community room above a bookstore, mismatched chairs, the smell of burnt coffee, a whiteboard with the words "Write it real" in purple marker. A man read about losing his wife, a teen shared a poem about being invisible in his own house. I didn't speak that night, but I listened. And something inside me cracked open. That night, I wrote a piece titled Things She Left That Weren't Hers. It was messy, ugly, raw. I didn't edit it, I just let it spill out, her ghost in every line. Rachel read it, she didn't say much, just nodded and said, "You're not crazy, you're just hurt." So I posted it on an old blog I hadn't touched since college. Within hours, comments trickled in. Man, this hit too close. I thought I was the only one. She ghosted me too, right before our wedding. I get it. I didn't know these people, but their pain mirrored mine, and that made me feel less alone. So I kept writing twice a week, then 3 times. Sometimes about her, sometimes about me. Sometimes just about how hard it was to buy bananas without thinking of her stupid smoothie obsession. It was an art, but it was honest. And honesty became my therapy. One Tuesday morning, I rearranged the bedroom, I moved the bed, I took down the photos, put my running shoes where her slippers used to be. That night, I slept through the night. No dreams, no panic, just rest. Went back to our old bookstore alone. I hadn't stepped foot in it since she left. But I walked in, grabbed a copy of East of Eden, and sat in our favorite corner chair. No tears, no flashbacks, just me reading. Rachel and I kept talking, nothing flirty, just kind. She checked in, sent me dumb writing prompts. I left snacks on my desk with notes like, "Feed your sad brain." One day, she handed me a tiny potted plant. "Take care of this. It won't fix you, but it'll remind you things grow." I named it Neil. Mornings got easier. I ran more. I ate better. I even started sleeping without checking my phone every hour for a text that would never come. One night, I passed a wedding dress store. Inside, a bride twirled in lace. I didn't flinch. I smiled. Even I went home and wrote, "I'm not healed, but I'm healing, and that's enough." At the community garden, Cheryl, a 70-year-old widow who talked to plants, once told me, pain's just proof you cared, but you don't owe it your whole life. That stayed with me. I started submitting my pieces to small zines. One accepted a post titled, "What do you do with an engagement ring?" They published it with a drawing of a cracked diamond. I printed it out and taped it on my fridge. A few weeks later, I ran into Julia, Emma's friend, at a farmer's market. She blinked like she saw a ghost. "You look solid," she said. "Thanks," I replied. She didn't mention Emma. I didn't ask. It was perfect. I stopped measuring my recovery in milestones. No more waiting to feel done. Just progress. Quiet, persistent, mine. Eventually, I threw away the mug. I was in the middle of ordering a black coffee when I heard her voice behind me. "Lucas?" For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. The name hung there, light, tentative, like a balloon someone was afraid to let go of. I turned. Emma. Same green eyes, same nervous half smile, same tilt of the head she used when she didn't know what to say, but her presence hit different now, like bumping into a ghost that still knew your name. "Hey," she said, clutching her purse, strapped like a lifeline. "Didn't expect to see you here." "This is the only decent coffee shop in a 10-mile radius," I said evenly. "So, yeah, I'm still me." She gave a shaky laugh. "Right, of course." I nodded toward the register. "I'm up next." She stepped aside. I ordered, took my time, picked up my drink, and looked at her. "You want to sit?" She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. We took a small table by the window, the same window we used to sit at back when things were simple. I watched her try to arrange her thoughts like loose papers in a windstorm. She opened with the classic, "You look good." "Thanks. We've changed." "Supposed to." Her eyes searched my face. "I've been reading your writing." Ah, there it was. The reason. She rushed on. "I didn't know you were doing that. It's powerful, honest, brave. Needed something to bleed into that wasn't a bottle." She winced. "I deserved that," she said quietly. Didn't disagree. "I've thought a lot about what happened," she continued. "How I left, how I didn't give you answers. She paused. I didn't even give you the decency of closure." "No," I said. "You didn't?" She looked down. "I've been trying to figure out how to say I'm sorry, but honestly, nothing feels enough." I let the silence stretch. She squirmed in it. Eventually, she said, "I was confused. I thought going back to my hometown would help me clear my head. And then I saw Ryan." "Your ex," I finished. She nodded. "And I thought maybe I had unresolved feelings. But I was wrong. Being with him again showed me what I didn't want, what I'd lost." I sipped my coffee. "And now I want to fix this," she said. "I want to fix us." I stared out the window. The world looked normal. People walking dogs, a woman pushing a stroller, a teenager laughing at a phone. Everything moved forward like it always does. She leaned in. "I know I broke your trust. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking. You're asking me to forget what you did?" "No, I'm asking you to let me make it right." I turned to her fully. "Why now?" Her voice cracked. "Because I miss you. Because I wake up thinking about you. Because every time I see your name on that blog, I see the man I should have stood beside." I didn't answer right away. I let her words settle, clumsy, desperate, real. Then I asked, "You remember what you said before you left?" She blinked. "Which part?" "That you needed time, that you didn't want to hurt me, that you weren't sure how you felt." "I remember." "And then you ghosted me for weeks while you sort out those feelings with him." Her voice was barely audible. "I know. You didn't call, you didn't write, you didn't tell me the truth. I had to drive across state lines to find out I was no longer plan A." She covered her mouth, her shoulders shook. I was a coward. No, I said, you were cruel. The words cut the air clean. Sharp. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She cried then. Silent tears. The kind that came with regret, not grief. I lost you, she whispered. No, I said, standing up. You gave me away. She looked up, mascara smudging. Lucas, please. Please, can't we start over? I tilted my head. Let me ask you something. She nodded. If Ryan had worked out, would you be here? The question landed hard. She froze. But I do, I said. She dropped her gaze. See, Emma, I continued. You didn't come back for love. You came back because the other door closed, and you assumed mine would still be open. I made a mistake. You made a choice. I slid my chair in slowly. No dramatics, no storming off, just the sound of someone reclaiming peace. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said gently, but it's not here anymore. As I turned, she called after me. Lucas, wait, can't we at least talk like people who once meant everything to each other? I paused. Something in her voice sounded hollow, like she realized the gravity of what she'd done a little too late. I turned halfway, not to engage, but to acknowledge. We are talking, I said. This is the only version of us that still exists. She stood up, shaky, eyes pleading. But people change. We grow. I'm not the same person who left. And I'm not the same person who waited, I replied. That seemed to hit her. She took a step forward as if proximity might bring clarity. I don't expect you to forget everything. I hoped you might still believe in what we had. I took a breath, not angry, just honest. What we had was beautiful. I'm not going to rewrite history and pretend it wasn't, but it died the moment you chose to keep me in the dark while you tested your feelings with someone else. I didn't plan it that way, but you let it happen. That's the difference. She looked down again, hands clenched at her sides. I keep thinking about all the little things. How you always made my tea just right. How you left sticky notes on the fridge when I had a bad day. How you always showed up. I gave a tired smile, and you stopped showing up when it mattered most. Silence stretched between us again. This time, I didn't rush to fill it. You always said you wanted someone stable, she said finally. Someone who wouldn't give up on you. I wanted someone who wouldn't make me beg to be chosen. Her lip quivered. I don't need promises anymore, I continued. I need peace, and I finally have it. I didn't wait for her reply. I walked out the door into a world that didn't stop spinning when she left, a world that welcomed me back on my own terms. For the first time, I realized that closure doesn't come from the other person. It comes from choosing yourself, loudly, finally, completely. The first morning after I told Emma goodbye, I woke up before my alarm. For a second, I didn't remember what day it was. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, but also strangely still, like the pause after a long, dragging breath. There was no message on my phone, no knock on the door, just silence. And you know what? It didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The grief didn't vanish. It never does. It just changed shape, less like a stabbing pain and more like a dull ache, like pressing on a bruise to remind yourself it's healing. I got up and made coffee, black, no sugar. I sat by the window and just stared at the morning light hitting the sidewalk, people walking their dogs, kids in backpacks. The usual rhythm of a world that didn't care. I just ended a 3-year engagement, and that felt weirdly comforting. Life didn't wait, it moved forward. And now, so would I. The first week was about recalibrating. I took long walks. I didn't check her social media. I unfollowed her and even muted mutual friends who might post photos. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want triggers pretending to be closure. At night, I wrote pages and pages, some angry, some poetic, some just stream of consciousness junk. But it helped. I emptied my head so I wouldn't carry the storm to bed. My friends checked in. Mark swung by with beers and a six-pack of silence. We watched basketball and didn't talk about her once. Jenna texted book recommendations like medicine. Read this. You'll hate the ending, but love yourself more. Mia didn't text again. I think she got the hint, or maybe Emma told her everything. Either way, I was glad for the space. I didn't want a new story built on the ruins of an old one. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, it was a quiet decision. Do I cancel the venue reservation? What about the honeymoon booking, our shared Spotify playlist? Do I keep the photos or store them in a folder called Before? Closure isn't one big moment. It's 1,000 little cuts that you stop picking at. Some nights, I missed her. Or rather, I missed who she used to be, or maybe who I used to be around her. But then I'd remind myself, that version of us doesn't exist anymore. And that's okay. I started going back to the gym, not for revenge, not for some glow-up montage, just to move, to sweat the sadness out. There's something oddly healing about lifting weights when your heart feels too heavy to carry. By week 3, I started laughing again. Not the forced social kind, real laughter over dumb memes or my friend's terrible impression of our old professor. The kind of laugh that surprises you because you didn't know it was still possible. One evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset melt into the skyline, and I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a text, not for an apology, not even for understanding. I was here, now, still breathing, still standing, and maybe, just maybe, becoming someone I could be proud of again. Healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I'd turned a corner only to find myself staring at a memory that knocked the air out of me. Like when I opened the drawer and saw the photo strip we took at the county fair. 4 silly poses. Her red lipstick smudged in the last one. I held it for a long moment. Then I put it in a box labeled past. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't leave it out either. Some memories are meant to be archived, not erased. My therapist, I finally got one, said something that stuck. You're grieving a version of your future. That's why it hurts, even when you know you made the right call. And damn, was she right. Because it wasn't just Emma I missed. It was the life we were building, the names we considered for kids, the couch we almost bought, the way her cold feet used to search for my warmth under the covers. Those weren't fantasies. They were almost realities, ghosts of plans we made with full hearts. But now, I am learning how to dream new ones, smaller at first, manageable, weekend hikes, a cooking class, finishing that novel draft I abandoned when wedding planning swallowed my time. I also started volunteering at a local youth writing program. Helping kids find their voice reminded me how I found mine. They didn't care about my failed engagement. They just wanted someone to read their poems and say, that line right there, that's gold. And slowly the weight lifted. Not all at once, not dramatically, but day by day, choice by choice. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and not because someone came along to save me, but because I finally stopped waiting for someone to... One night, I made a list. Not of goals, not of dreams, just of things I'd forgotten I loved. Mornings without alarms, jazz on vinyl, driving nowhere with the windows down, the smell of fresh basil, falling asleep to rain. Promised myself I'd do more of that, not for Instagram, not to prove I was okay, just for me. That's the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. The world doesn't shrink, it expands, slowly, painfully, but beautifully. And maybe one day love will come again, but this time it'll meet me whole. 6 months later, I found myself walking through the very same park where Emma and I once talked about forever. Only this time I wasn't haunted. I was hosting a small outdoor writing workshop, a mix of teenagers and college kids with notebooks and raw voices, all trying to say something real. The wind blew through the trees, and I read aloud a line from one of my old blog posts. When you survive being broken, your honesty becomes dangerous. A girl with a bright purple streak in her hair raised her hand and asked, "What does that mean?" I smiled. "It means once you stop pretending, you become someone nobody can lie to, not even yourself." She scribbled it down like it mattered. Later, as the group packed up, someone called my name. I turned. It wasn't Emma. It was a stranger, well, not completely. Her name was Claire. We'd spoken briefly a few weeks back at the library. She worked in archival research, had a sarcastic streak, and wore mismatched socks on purpose. "Read your latest essay," she said, walking up with a coffee in hand. "You write like someone who's bled through every page." "Comes with the territory," I replied. She grinned. "Want to walk with me?" We strolled without hurry, trading small thoughts. Nothing deep, nothing desperate, just air and steps and the simplicity of company with no expectations. I didn't check my phone. I didn't feel haunted. I didn't even think about Emma. And that's when it hit me. Healing doesn't end with fireworks or some dramatic closing scene. Sometimes it ends on a quiet path beside someone new laughing about dogs in Halloween costumes, sipping lukewarm coffee and not needing to prove anything. The past no longer had claws in me, and the future, it was wide open. Claire bumped my shoulder. "So what's your next story?" I looked at her, the trees above us blooming with new leaves, the world humming not with answers, but with possibilities. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think it's going to be a good one." We walked past a row of local street vendors, handmade candles, secondhand books, watercolor postcards. Claire paused at a booth selling rings made from repurposed silver spoons. "Did you know," she said, lifting one, "that spoons used to be given as wedding gifts in Victorian times?" I raised an eyebrow. "A wedding spoon, that's poetic." "Or sad, depending on how you look at it," she smirked. "One day it's a promise, the next it's jewelry for someone else." I chuckled. "Sounds like my memoir title." She handed the ring back and turned toward the cafe at the corner. "Come on, storyteller, first round's on me." The inside was warm, all amber lighting and soft jazz. We found a corner table, and for a while we talked about everything but our pasts. She told me about her obsession with obscure documentaries and how she once camped in the desert to watch a meteor shower alone. I shared the time I accidentally sent a love letter meant for Emma to my boss. Thankfully, it only said, "I miss your face." She laughed so hard she snorted. No judgment, just joy. Eventually, the topic drifted. "Was it recent?" she asked gently. I nodded. 6 months. Feels like 6 years some days. Others, like last week. She didn't push, just sipped her coffee and let the silence do the holding. Then she said, "You seem whole, not fixed, just comfortable with the cracks." "I worked hard for that," I said. "I can tell." We left the cafe as the sky turned lavender. At the crosswalk, we stood in quiet. Not every ending needs closure. Sometimes it needs a beginning you don't try to control. We parted with a wave, no promises, no subtext, just two people who met each other exactly where they were. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I lived it. The following weekend, I ran into Claire again, this time at the community bookstore downtown. She was flipping through a collection of translated poetry, one of those obscure publishers with pages that still smelled like ink. "You stalking me now?" I teased. She grinned without looking up. "Nah, you just have good taste in hiding spots." We grabbed coffee again. This time I brought two paperbacks I thought she'd like. She'd highlighted the last essay I wrote, the one about solitude. Her margin notes made me laugh. Tiny, sharp comments like, "Oof, this hurt," in a good way. It was nice. Not the kind of nice that's boring. The kind that makes you feel light. A few weeks passed. We kept bumping into each other on purpose and not. Once at a farmer's market, another time outside a vintage cinema screening a black and white film neither of us ended up watching. And then on a rainy Thursday night, she showed up at my doorstep with 2 mugs and a look that said, "I don't need anything from you, just your company." So we sat, no labels, no expectations, just 2 people learning that maybe not all rebounds are crashes, some are slow dances back to yourself with someone gently waiting beside you. And somehow that was the best kind of love I never saw coming. I didn't know where things with Claire were going, and that was okay. Some stories don't need an outline, just a heartbeat, a pen, and the courage to begin.